we are gonna let people in and give it a minute just for people to be able to join in, and then we should be starting shortly. All right. So good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar, Getting Started with Collaboration for Climate Adaptation Planning. My name is Anta. I'll be your host today. I'm joined behind the scenes by my amazing colleagues, Santiana and Mo, working on the production side. Today's webinar will feature exciting panelists and resources to help you at any stage of your adaptation planning journey. Before diving in, I would like to share a few housekeeping items just to help us run through today's session smoothly. So today's event will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation channel, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. The option is represented by a small globe icon. Aujourd'hui, notre présentation se fera en anglais.
Today, the presentation will be in English. However, if you would like to listen to it in French, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see a little globe, and choose the French option.
We also have two separate slide decks in English and French. See the option at the top of the screen to switch between the two. As we go through today's presentation, please share any content-related questions in the Q&A box. Don't forget to include your community, the speaker you would like to address the question to, and it will be answered hopefully at the Q&A at the end. You're welcome to ask questions or request technical assistance at any time using the chat box in the language of your choice. We will keep an eye open and respond as needed. Finally, we encourage you to rename yourself using the convention first, last name, followed by your municipality, if spacing allows. So I would like to anchor today's session by sharing that I'm joining you from Ottawa, the national capital, and acknowledging that this land is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We at FCM also recognize the contribution of Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our country as a whole. I am deeply grateful to live and work on this land, which I aim to help safeguard for the next generation. Please feel free to add what region or territory you're joining us from today. If you're unsure of the land you're joining us from, nativeland.ca is a wonderful resource to learn more. Today's webinar is offered to you through the Growing Municipal Fund, GMF. It's delivered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. GMF manages approximately $2.4 billion in programs funded by the Government of Canada. Today's panelists are joining the following. So Lauren Saville, who's the Community Climate Initiatives Coordinator for the Regional District of Muskoka. Imara Rolstone, who is Policy Development Officer at the Community Development Unit, Social Development for the City of Toronto. And last but not least, obviously, Rebecca Wallace, who is the Project Manager at the Community Development Unit, Social Development for the City of Toronto. I guess we will begin by exploring suggested tips to engage in municipal climate adaptation planning. So before we dive into the material, we would love to get a sense and read the room a little bit more in terms of getting your level of involvement in municipal collaboration for climate adaptation. So I can see the poll is going on, but please take a minute to share, and we'll be very happy to see how things are going. I can see that we're getting most of the participants so far. Amazing. Giving a few minutes. Perfect. So the poll seems to be closed for now, and the answers are getting in, but it seems like we have a good understanding of people who have been involved in municipal collaboration for climate adaptation, which we're very happy and eager to see for now. Amazing. So before we start, we would like to take a few steps back and wrap our heads around what we mean by municipal collaboration for climate adaptation. So at its most basic level, really and truly, municipal collaboration is about municipalities working together with external stakeholders, which can include regional and native communities, different level of government, community organizations, and other relevant partners. So when we apply this idea of, let's say, collaboration to climate adaptation, it means local government are actively engaging with stakeholders to bring in different perspectives, knowledge, and capacities. All of this input really and truly to help inform and strengthen climate adaptation plans and processes itself. Now, in terms of how is this beneficial to communities, collaboration really play a key role in building a strong, resilient, and foster communities. On the adaptation front, efforts are made effectively when they reflect a wide range of experiences and when everybody in the community is included, so that benefits trickle down and are shared and enjoyed by all. To help you really and truly ease your collaboration efforts, our team have developed a practical fact sheet that outlines different ways to engage in climate collaboration. All of the suggestions in the fact sheets are organized in two main approaches. The first is mapping your network, which means identifying who you already have connection with outside of your organization. This will help you understand where collaboration is already happening and help you troubleshoot or find new opportunities to work with others. The second approach is to be working in collaboration, which focuses on developing a strong understanding of your partner's needs, builds meaningful relationship, and establish a shared understanding of the goals of the partnership. We strongly encourage you to review our tip sheet, start collaborating on municipal climate adaptation, which is available on our website and can be accessed through the QR code on the screen for more information. So let's start with the first part, mapping your network. So mapping a network can happen in numerous ways. Ideally, you will start the process by assessing your current situation to better understand and better acknowledge existing relationship with external partners. One way to do this is by looking at collaborations that have already been in place, which can involve reaching out to colleagues, gathering insights on current potential partnership opportunities, and reaching out and conducting the outreach can be as simple as sending an email, circulating a short survey, hosting a meeting to help you identify partners that would be or organizations that could be involved in successful collaborations and that or were involved in the past. Another way to map your network is by identifying new partnership opportunities. This means looking at stakeholders who are already involved in climate adaptation initiatives, as well as communities that may be at risk. This can include, but not limited to, regional, provincial, territorial government, or even non-for-profit organizations, vulnerable groups, farmers, agricultural communities, local industries, healthcare providers, and any other group that you deem relevant. Once again, our tip sheet provides helpful guiding questions to help you map your network for potential relevant partners in the sphere of climate adaptation. The second approach to engaging in municipal collaboration for climate adaptation that we would recommend is to work collaboratively. So there are several ways this can be achieved. One approach could be to focus on building relationship, creating lasting and meaningful partnerships with external stakeholders. And acknowledging also that it takes time and intention, which does also involve getting and investing time and resources to know your potential collaborators, building trust, and being especially mindful of relationship building when working with Nations. A second approach will be to start small. So initially, your collaboration doesn't need to be complex. In the context of climate adaptation, it can involve working with partners, identifying how climate change is affecting the community, and exploring potential actions to manage those impacts. A third approach we would recommend is to tailor your collaboration methods effectively. Partnerships can take many different forms depending on the need of the project and the interest of those involved. Within the context of climate adaptation work, engagement can happen through workshops, brainstorming sessions, one-on-one collaboration, or even specific working groups to address specific tasks, partnerships to conduct climate risk assessments, joint initiative, or as simple as a community of practice. Finally, one key element we would recommend is really working collaboratively to develop a shared understanding. So it is crucial and important that you confirm with your partners their expectations early on, and you establish clarity around roles and goals that the partnership or the collaboration will involve, so that the work is successful. For more specific illustrations of collaborative approaches in climate adaptation, our tip sheet would provide practical examples to serve your requests. We hope that the information that has been shared so far has been useful. Before handing it over to Lauren to hear about Muskoka's approach to collaboration for the regional climate adaptation plan, we would love to test your knowledge. Please take a moment to respond to the quiz and indicate the most important actions to help identify and develop collaboration needed for climate adaptation. So the quiz seems to be coming up on our screen, and I can see that answers are coming in. Just gonna give people a few minutes to log in their answer. Okay, we're getting good answers. The last few seconds, just so that the last people can squeeze in. Good. Awesome. So I'm very happy to see and pleased that answers have been the most answer, and the answer to the quiz was actually all of the above, and that it did actually show up. So I'm going to share the results so that people can see them. And that should be it. So now we are going to move on to the next part of this amazing session. I will now like it to pass to Lauren, who is our first panelist from the Regional District of Muskoka. Lauren has been the Climate Change Initiative Coordinator with the district since September 2024. She's an experienced environmental and science educator with 12 years of experience engaging audiences of all age on topics like climate change, biodiversity, and animal behavior. She's also a proud community member of Muskoka, now calling Bracebridge home. Over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We can go to the next slide. So this is a quick agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about our RECAP plan, which is our regional climate adaptation plan that we worked on with our area municipalities. I'm going to talk about how the process worked, some lessons learned and tips and tricks for success, and our final outcomes. And then I think at the end of our sessions today, we'll have some time for questions. Next slide, please. So I did want to do a quick land acknowledgement. Indigenous people have called Muskoka home for time immemorial. Muskoka is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee nations have also walked through this land over time. And today, Muskoka is home to three sovereign nations, the Wata Mohawk First Nation, the Moose Deer Point First Nation, and the Moon River Métis. And it's really important to recognize the first caretakers of this land and their vital traditional ecological knowledge that they used then and now to understand how to live in harmony with the environment. Next slide, please. So just a little background about the District of Muskoka. The District of Muskoka is what we call an upper tier municipality, and we're located in central Ontario, colloquially known, I think, to most people as cottage country, at least from the GTA area. We are made up of 6 area or lower tier municipalities. These include the town of Huntsville, town of Bracebridge, town of Gravenhurst, and the townships of Lake of Bays, Muskoka Lakes, and Georgian Bay. So we have a quite unique mix of residents. So 66,600 residents here are all year round, but 84,000 plus residents are seasonal population. So we have a huge influx. Basically, more than our resident population comes up every spring and summer and fall to visit their cottages and summer and seasonal homes. Second homes actually account for 47% of the homes in the district. So it is quite a unique area to live, and that causes some challenges for us in terms of infrastructure and planning for things like waste and water and roads. 47% of the population is also 55 plus, so we have quite a large senior and retirement population up here as well. We are lucky, and I think that's why so many people come and visit us, is we have over 640 lakes and 38 significant wetlands in our region. But we are impacted quite a lot from climate change fueled events. In the last 12 months, we've had an ice storm, we've had intense smoke from forest fires, we've had extreme snowfall, as I'm sure in Toronto you've experienced as well. We've also had 50 plus centimeter days of snow up here too. Our last major flood was in 2019, which was the worst flood on record. Thankfully, it's not flooded as badly since then, but that is something that is likely to happen again more frequently. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of overview of our climate change staff. So the role I'm in at the moment has been in place since 2019. It has evolved quite a bit over time. When it was first implemented, it was a focus on planning and policy and putting our climate plans into place. But now we have our community, which is called our CERP, our Community Energy and Emissions Reduction Plan, which is basically my job to make happen. And then we also have our corporate climate plan, which we now have 2 staff who oversee that plan, a manager and a coordinator that were hired last year. So we now basically have 3 staff within the district who oversee climate change related initiatives. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to take a moment to just mention the differences between climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So when we're talking about mitigation, we're talking about reducing our emissions. So this is what's the focus of my community emissions reduction plan, is reducing the community's emissions. So things like more sustainable transport, clean energy, energy efficiency. And then on the other side, we have adaptation. So this is how our communities and our towns and our cities will adapt to the changes due to climate change. So disaster management, preparedness, infrastructure upgrades, flood protection, fire protection, things like that. And that was the focus of our regional climate plan. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a roadmap to show kind of where we started and where we are today. So in 2020, the district declared a climate emergency. And from there, we were able to get support and funding and money to create our different climate plans, to do a greenhouse gas inventory and figure out our targets, and then create the regional climate adaptation plan, and also do some fleet decarbonization, watershed management, and our Climate Hero program that we launched last year. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a brief overview about the recap. So this is a climate adaptation plan tailored to the needs of 5 of our 6 area municipalities. So we had Town of Huntsville, Town of Bracebridge, Town of Gravenhurst, Township of Muskoka Lakes, and Township of Lake of Bays involved in this plan. Township of Georgian Bay ended up going with a local Georgian Bay based sustainability group that was focused on the communities in the Georgian Bay area, and they worked with them on their plan. So the plan was developed in partnership with the district and area municipalities with the support of ICLEI Canada through a collaborative process. We had stakeholders like the district, area municipality staff, and community stakeholders involved. We got a grant through the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which was extremely helpful to get this work done. And as the area municipalities didn't at the time have climate-focused staff at the time, the district kind of took on that role because this role was already in place here. Next slide. So the goal of the plan was to build upon actions taken by the area municipalities to address climate change. So we kind of took a broad approach and involved the community as well as municipal administration because both groups are really important for this work. We want to involve the community. They have a stake in this. So we had community groups such as Community Action Muskoka, some sustainability and watershed groups. We had the Simcoe Muskoka Health Unit. We had Indigenous communities. So we really tried to get as much of a broad group as possible. We had school boards, a lot of different groups involved. I think at the time it was about 20, which was a good amount to kind of get those various voices into the conversation. And although climate change obviously affects all of us and everywhere, the direct impacts really vary significantly. And each of the area municipalities are unique with varying populations, geographic size, financial capacity, staff capacity. Our towns like Huntsville are quite large with a population of about 20,000. Gravenhurst is smaller at 12,000. And then our townships are mostly seasonal resident space with some small towns with a resident full-time population, but are quite small. And they more have the seasonal influx of cottagers that come, and that makes for different needs and kind of focus for these different climate plans. So it really made sense to divide the action plan by the different area municipalities. Next slide, please. So to do this process, we use the BARC method from ICLEI Canada, which stands for Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities Framework. So this is a really helpful framework to get everyone on the same page. So I think probably a lot of you are familiar with it, so I'm not going to go into much detail, but we basically went through milestone 1, 2, and 3 in this process to get to a plan. And at this point, the area municipalities are at milestone 4 looking to implement their plans. Next slide, please. So the process was based around 5 workshops. So we had the kickoff and impact statement workshop in November 2021. So given the dates, this was COVID time. So the majority of this work was done virtually. So the impact statements helped to kind of consider what the climate threats were and their effects on the built natural, social, and economic systems of each municipality. Then we worked into a vulnerability assessment. So where were the vulnerable areas? Then go to a risk assessment to understand what the risks are. So up here, some of our greatest risks are floods, forest fires, extreme weather events, extreme heat, and how this would impact the social, economic, and environment. And then we worked one-on-one with the area municipality staff and the senior team at the district and ICLEI to work on kind of actually getting the actions down and figuring out what they wanted to put in their plan. And then we had an implementation workshop to put together their implementation schedules, and then the district staff put together the plan with ICLEI, and then we had that ready in 2023. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share some lessons learned that we kind of went through this process and kind of see what worked best. Having different communication channels, since different approaches work differently for people. So phone calls, emails, in person, virtual. works for different people. So kind of figuring out what works best and focusing on the unique aspects of your community. Being on the Canadian Shield and the impacts of a large seasonal population means that infrastructure and planning is looked at a lot differently here than, say, urban centers in the GTA. So we really need to have a tailored approach based on our unique geography and unique population makeup. Also create space for municipalities and partners to come up with their own ideas. There's lots of brainstorming and brainstorming planning tools online now, like Miro. Canva has a lot of great kind of brainstorming boards. So lots of really cool stuff out there if you're doing something virtual or if you want to lead something and like have someone do it on the computer. And don't come with a like very prescribed process. Let it develop, let it evolve. And make sure there are clear lines between elected officials and staff. Obviously, elected officials might have their views about things, but the staff are the ones doing this on the ground. So make sure that the staff are the ones kind of leading the charge with the work. And realize you're not all coming from the same place. I think a lot of us in the space are climate change experts. We are in the space, we live in it, we breathe it, but not everyone is, and that's okay. And coming from a place of openness, of education and understanding to where people are coming from is really important as well. Next slide, please. So some tips and tricks. Finding a grant to support the work is always really helpful. Municipalities are strapped for cash, so getting a grant to support this is really great. There's lots of grants out there through like FCM and the province. Identifying trusted partners and allies, not just official ones, but those community members who have a stake and who want to be involved in this. Holding sessions around the locations in the community you're working in so everyone can be involved and it be accessible. And ground the plan in local impacts. So you want to focus on the things that are really going to benefit the most people in the community. So tree planting is shade, lower energy bills, safer streets, and also carbon sequestration. And then start with the basics and build off what's already there. So warming centers, but how can you make them better, more accessible, working for everyone? Infrastructure upgrades that would have to be done anyways, but make them climate adaptation ready and response to extreme weather events that we're already facing. So how do we make that better and more supportive? Next slide, please. And just to share our final outcome, so we ended up having tailored plans that took an equity-focused lens for climate adaptation that were built around the specific needs of each area municipality. So we had the local expertise of district staff on the impacts of climate change here in Muskoka, and then also had the overall climate planning and policy information from ICLEI. So it was really great to have both those sides. And then at the end of the day, this provides reasoning for the area municipality councils and councillors as to why a climate change and environmental role should be hired. I think a lot of us know that you need the staff to do this work. It's not something that can be done on the side of your desk. You need dedicated staff to do it. So this has allowed Huntsville and Lake of Bays to hire one staff that they share, and Bracebridge and Gravenhurst both have plans to bring on staff around these roles in 2026, 2027, which is really exciting to see. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to end off with a quick quote from my kind of environmental mentor. We understand all the different ways that we can combat and slow down climate change, but do we have the will? And that's from Jane Goodall. So thank you, and I'll answer questions, I guess, at the end of the presentations today.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for what has been truly a very inspiring and very local-based lessons learned, especially focused presentation. We are very happy that you took some time to share some uh, words and lessons learned with us today. The next iteration of the presentation, which is our lovely colleagues from Toronto. So without further ado, I would like to pass it to Imara and Rebecca so they can share some wisdom with us. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Imara and Rebecca and let them and hear from them talk about the efforts that Toronto has invested to collaborate with vulnerable groups. Over to you.
Thanks, Anta. Good afternoon, folks, or at least it's afternoon in Toronto. I'm Rebecca Wallace. I have the great pleasure of being here with my colleague Imara this afternoon, and we work together in the City of Toronto's Social Development Division, which is one that really seeks to drive transformative change across the corporation, across the municipality, with equity and justice at the center of that work. I'll pass it to Imara to say hello.
Hi, folks. Good afternoon. My name is Imara. I work with, I get to work with Rebecca Wallace, leading the Jane Finch Community Development Plan and other pieces of work around climate resilience. So we're really happy to be here with you all. And, we're storytellers and dialogue-based folks. So we're just going to have a conversation with you all today.
We'll move to the next slide, please. And appreciate the ongoing acknowledgement in today's session about the land that we all have the privilege of being on, whether as settlers in this generation or generations past. In Toronto, we continue to reflect on how the work that we're doing is exploring the principles of truth and reconciliation with the Mississaugas of the Credit, with the Anishinaabe, with the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and also thinking about going beyond truth and reconciliation and really thinking about what it means to explore reparative justice, to work with rights holders, and how that can be reflected in the plans and strategies that we're developing at the municipal level, and with great respect and care for the stewards of the land and the waters. Imara?
Yeah. The city of Toronto was, believe one of the first cities to advance and establish a confronting anti-Black racism unit. And so that work has been extremely instructive for the whole city in terms of honoring the contributions and the belongingness of Black folks within this city. But also acknowledging the ways that Black folks are impacted by systemic racism and the ways that the city can do better to address histories of inequity and the way it shows up in neighborhoods, and in particular, disproportionate climate vulnerability in neighborhoods that Black folks have called home for a long time. So whenever we acknowledge, whenever we do the African ancestral acknowledgement, it's always to acknowledge the fact that there are wells, deep wells of resilience and community that it's our duty to partner with and follow, because that work and that foundation has been there for quite a long time. Next slide. So folks, we can't talk about the great work, and I'll say the great work that Rebecca Wallace has been doing around social development's climate resilience without talking about the historical timeline and some of the key moments that got us to this place where we're expanding our work and our focus on community climate resilience from a just and equitable standpoint. We have our friends in environment and climate that have been doing really important climate-focused work for quite a long time, increasing their focus on mitigation, deepening their commitment to adaptation. And that particular focus on resilience and adaptation really started to sort of coalesce around 2013, when environment and climate applied to be a part of the 100 Resilient Cities, which I'll talk about, the Rockefeller Foundation's global initiative to fund 100 cities to develop their own climate resilience strategies. In 2019, that climate resilience strategy became real after some really in-depth engagement with communities that I'll talk a bit about. And so that was a really seminal moment for the City of Toronto and all staff to think about how we get around collectively this approach to climate resilience as a whole city approach. But also there was 2020, we can't ignore that. COVID-19 in many ways was the dress rehearsal for what we're going to see in terms of the advance of the climate crises. It was an example of what happens when mass disruption deepens inequity and shows up the ways that we're not ready to deal and manage that mass disruption. And so there's a lot learned there. And so the social development approach to community climate resilience really sort of is emerging out of this historical time and these key moments. And we'll talk a bit about that throughout this presentation. Next slide. Thank you. So City of Toronto was lucky to be a part of a network of cities, including Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, Montreal, all cities that were advancing their own climate resilience strategies at the same time. And that meant that we had the unbelievable opportunity to converse, connect, and share learnings with those cities as they evolved. Places like Boston, Montreal, Vancouver were particularly close to us in terms of our learnings. And from the 100 City Resilient Cities Network, we sort of inherited this framing of an understanding of climate resilience, and that was this idea of resilience challenges. So this moment where stresses like disproportionate poverty, a lack of services meet with shocks like heat waves and flooding. And so a part of what we recognize at the City of Toronto is that we had to expand our conversation from the hotter, wetter, and wilder, which is what our chief resilience officer used to say, towards a more broad understanding of inequity in the city. And this work, in actual fact, coincided with the work that a lot of us are probably familiar with, that David Helchansky led around the 3 cities and 2 cities work, talking about the way that the City of Toronto was becoming more unequal over time, and the way that race was showing up, and increasing levels of racial segregation were showing up in our city. And so we entered the development of the resilience strategy, not just with the hotter, wetter, and wilder of climate, but also with the recognition that there are some troubling trends in our city from a stresses standpoint that we have to take into account, and that has to reshape and shape the way we think about engaging with Torontonians and residents across the city, and who we engage with and who we focus on in particular. Next slide. Thanks, Anton. So what does that mean? That means that we very purposely decided to design an equitable engagement process that was both light touch and deep. The City of Toronto, through social development, has been doing a lot of work to identify and work with neighborhoods that have had a history of underinvestment. We call those neighborhoods now neighborhood improvement areas. And those neighborhood improvement areas are areas that are in need of increased resourcing. And so for Resilient TO and the team that was designing the resilience strategy, we recognized that there was a need to sort of over-focus on those areas to learn more. And so one of our deep touch approaches was to work with partners like the Center for Connected Communities and the East Coast Scarborough Storefront to design what we call the Resilient Conversations process, in which we created a Resilient Conversations toolkit and worked with people called local champions, or what we're calling here local leaders, that are representing different neighborhoods. And when we talk about local champions, we're talking about folks who have deep relationships in community, who have deep connections with the networks that sustain communities, and have a history of doing community work over time. And those folks were in many ways our consultants, our wayfinders, our guides, our teachers as we went through this process. One of the things I always say is we came in with a really pretty idea around what this Resilient Conversations toolkit and process could look like. And we got checked pretty hard at the door around what some of our assumptions were. And that was critical for us in terms of opening ourselves up to being taught about how to follow community through this kind of process. And so we held these conversations across 7 neighborhood improvement areas across the city, in Scarborough, in Jane Finch, in Mount Dennis. And we called these resilient conversations deep dialogues. They included anywhere from probably about, I would say, 30 to 50 folks in each dialogue. And they lasted anywhere from 1 hour to 4 hours, because in some cases, people just want to stay and keep talking. At the same time, we recognize that from a deep engagement standpoint, small number of conversations across neighborhood improvement areas wasn't enough. And so we organized a telephone town hall with a focus on the very same neighborhood improvement areas and more, to engage residents who have had a history of being over-engaged but underheard. And so the telephone town hall was a way to sort of bring residents, 6,000 plus residents from across the city, into a conversation about climate resilience through an arts-informed approach. And so that's where you see the combining of light touch and deep engagement. And some of the key things that we learned from this is that, well, number one, it's really important to have a strong focus on neighborhood improvement areas. I'll talk about how this approach radically transformed the resilience strategy overall, that we need to combine these sort of light touch and deep engagement approaches. That arts-informed approaches create opportunities that are deeply accessible, and that dialogue-driven approaches also ensure that we're not preaching and teaching, but that we're doing more listening than we are preaching and teaching. And then it's our responsibility to figure out how we carry that wisdom, those perspectives, and those insights into the process in a concrete way. Next slide. And so what did it mean for Resilient TO after doing this sort of in-depth engagement? And I should say those engagements were one of many. We had a number of engagements across the city, but those were sort of our seminal ones. What we recognized is that we couldn't just consult. We had to move beyond the consultation engagement process. I think that's what was a distinct learning for us in Resilient TO. There is often a model, I think, for us that's quite comfortable, where we engage communities, take those lessons, we process those lessons, and then decide how to translate into policy. I have one of my favorite artists and singers, Solange Knowles, who has a song called A Seat at the Table. And we recognize that as a city of Toronto, we had to figure out how to create seats at the table when it came to actual policy design and development. And so what we recognized that we had to do is we had these local champions who had held these deep dialogues across these neighborhood improvement areas, who had these deep networks. And rather than having small internal conversations with city staff across divisions, with the Wells Institutes and really important institutions that have this sort of eye for resilience alone, we brought the local champions to the table with all these folks to co-design the focus of the resilience strategy itself. And what really happened and what we heard after that sort of, and what you see here in the picture is like that key engagement, is that the local champions radically transformed the conversation at each of the tables that they were at. If those local champions hadn't been there in those conversations, the strategy would have been completely different. And so what we learned is we had to move beyond engagement towards a policy co-design and collaboration approach that increasingly increases our accountability to the folks that we aim to serve through the city. And so, ultimately, what we hope is that equitable engagement leads to equitable policy focus and outcomes. And I'll just sort of read this quote that sort of, I think, depicts the shift that came out of it. Equity was also by far the top theme that emerged from engagement with residents who shared that things like a lack of affordable and stable housing, a lack of reliable transit, concern about community safety and loss of life, and discrimination in finding employment all impact their ability to be resilient. So the resilience lens expands out and deepens in a way that it wouldn't had we not had those local champions at the table. Next slide, thank you. So what does that mean for the outcome of the resilience strategy itself concretely? This really set us on a trajectory towards focusing on equitable neighborhood resilience, this idea that there was a neighborhood level conversation in partnership with community organizations that have been in those neighborhoods for a long time that needed to be had at a policy level. And so that is where our sort of focus on neighborhood community resilience really started to emerge and evolve. I think the other piece, and these are sort of two sort of pages from the resilience strategy itself. So the left is the neighborhood resilience priority action. And on the right is this wheel that our great colleague Amy Bounthouse developed. And it was this recognition that once you expand the resilience lens to incorporate things like transit, et cetera, it means that we're talking about a whole city approach. So it's not just environment and climate that carries climate resilience. It's parks, forestry, and recreation. It's Toronto emergency management. It is economic development and culture. It are divisions that typically aren't considered a part of the climate conversation, but absolutely need to be if we're thinking about equitable climate resilience and how climate vulnerability is being experienced by folks who've lived in neighborhoods that have been underinvested in over time. And so this is how it shifted the conversation. These pieces here would not have been there without the approach that we took, and they certainly would not have been there had we not started to think about how do we create a seat at the table so that the folks who are leading us through this process in community are actually at the table when we're designing the policy itself. So that's just a snapshot of how the resilience strategy brought us, and I think brought social development into a new way of thinking about what climate resilience can look like through the sort of policy levers and programs and initiatives that we have at our disposal. So from here, I'll hand over to Wallace to talk about the dope and amazing work that she's been leading on behalf of social development. Next slide. Thanks, Anta.
Thanks, Imara. So I think, the historical context that Imara has just laid when we think about the resilience strategy being developed in 2019, and then March 2020 happens, and everything is turned upside down with the COVID-19 pandemic. It really required new and interesting ways of social development doing our work in partnership with other city divisions, certainly, but also thinking about the relationships that we have with the nonprofit sector and how they function in Toronto as that social fabric across the city. So they're the ones that are trusted, they're place-based. The relationships that they have with community members run very deep. And we were really quickly able to recognize that bringing these organizations together to work with both the city and United Way as core funders and supporters of the nonprofit sector would enable certainly streamline approaches to the ways that we're working and create new opportunities for collaboration across organizations that we'd never seen historically in Toronto, but also ensuring that we were able to really reach Indigenous, Black, and equity deserving communities who were in need and deserving of the additional support and services that were really challenging to access during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in thinking about that, we developed what is called the Community Coordination Plan. It's a partnership platform of 350 nonprofit organizations that operate across the city. We've recently been working with the Canadian Red Cross to step more fully into the community resilience space and working to assess both individual organization capacity and readiness in response to future emergencies, many of which will be climate related, but also to think about how we can come together in clusters or groups of community organizations to work together to avoid that siloed effect and really be able to weave together the connections. And so what the other things that you're seeing on this slide here are really all the other components of our work that we're trying to weave together. A lot of our team's work focuses on community capacity building at a local level with community leaders from across the city. We do that through the establishment of advisory groups, of a local leadership grant program. We're embedding a climate-related training series that's based on a train the trainer model that we developed with ICLEI last year. Thinking about how that and other ambassador models that we know are proven effective. The ambassador model that we created during the COVID-19 pandemic was certainly one that is a world-leading model. So thinking about how that model can be repurposed around issues like heat relief, which is a clear priority for us. And then exploring educational institution partnerships has really been a critical component of the work. I admittedly am not a climate expert. I'm a community development person. But I think when we talk about equity and justice, we know that climate issues are really at the center of many of those issues, and the cascading effects are astronomical. And so I have also been able to sort of step into this learning process of deepening my own understanding with the hope of being able to partner with the experts in the field to make those connections to the actual folks that need to be a part of this process. I'm going to move to the next slide and also do a quick time check with Anta.
Yes, thank you so much. I guess we can keep going and then maybe have 1-2 more minutes and then maybe have a short Q&A.
Perfect.
As we're getting closer to the time.
Yes, thanks, Anta. Imara, over to you to talk a little bit about CDPs.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, folks, this is one quick example that we want to share with you that frames out how the resilience strategy, the work that Wallace is doing, has transformed the way the social development thinks about its work. For the first time, the City of Toronto recognized that there was an opportunity to work with different divisions to think about how neighborhoods change over time. And so the Community Development Plan is an example of the first time land use planning has been done in conjunction with social development policy, economic development policy, parks, forestry, recreation, everybody at the same table, creating sibling plans that work together to address big issues like climate justice and climate action. And so this is the first time, for instance, and so this is embedding equity in the land use plan so that communities can thrive and be more equitable. So this is the first time that, for instance, private development applications have to speak to a community development plan that speaks about climate justice and action. And it's the first time that social development and other divisions are sitting down to assess those applications and respond back to private developers. The reason why this is important is because what we heard in the resilience strategy process was that our neighborhoods came to be, and the disproportionate climate vulnerability that we see in particular neighborhoods came to be partly because we didn't have these tools and this whole systems approach. And so when we're thinking about the way the neighborhood develops over time, it can't just be planning at the table alone. It has to be all of us working together. And as Wallace was saying, breaking down silos and figuring out how to create aligned policy together to address some of the big issues like climate, like food injustice, like transforming approaches to community safety and well-being that support communities to sort of thrive even when there are security challenges. And so this is like a new approach that sort of that represents that whole city approach that came out of the resilience strategy. Next slide, Anta, really quickly. And so just to quickly say that the community development plans were first developed in Jane Finch and Downsview. These are the first community development plans in the city that have both a land use plan and a community development plan. There are some unique things that have come out of them. For instance, an anti-displacement strategy, and a number of things. But the most important piece is that in both neighborhoods, we engaged almost 3,000 folks, taking some of the lessons from the resilience strategy and other sort of really important engagement approaches developed through social development, and engaged up to almost 3,000 folks in Jane Finch, and similarly folks surrounding Downsview to get to a place where we have the actions that are aligned with resident perspectives. And so that means not only are we bringing residents to the table around the design of the plan, we also are bringing more divisions together to think collectively about how we translate that into action. And moving forward, all these community development plans will have resident leadership circles who will also most likely inform development applications that are coming through the pipeline, but also guide the city around how we can better address community needs, community issues, meet community vision where it's at, and in particular, think about what community climate resilience can look like when we all work together across divisions with residents in a really deeply interconnected way, with a focus on holistic rights-based stewardship of neighborhood change. So just wanted to like profile that. You can look that up on the City of Toronto website. It's the first time it's been done. And we think there's a lot of potential here. But again, this is the outspring of all the great work that folks like Rebecca Wallace and others in the city have been doing for some time. And this is, in many ways, I think the vanguard of the way we're thinking about cross-divisional work together to address big issues like climate resilience. Next slide, Anta.
Thanks for that, Imara. It's always exciting to hear you talk about the groundbreaking work that you're doing on community development plans, the first of their kind, certainly for the City of Toronto. And I'm sure many other municipalities are eager to know more about that. We wanted to end on this slide just to give you a sense of some of the foundational pieces of work that are directing the different levers that we're utilizing, activating to kind of weave everything together. It is a complex story, as you can see from this visual. But I think that there's a lot of beauty in that complexity because it's a demonstration of the fact that there are so many folks who are keen to address this polycrisis that we have before us, that we're already experiencing and have been for some time. And so to be able to some days it feels like cobbled together, and in other days it feels very strategic and focused. But regardless, I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in a short amount of time, and knowing the time pressure that we're under when it comes to climate-related issues, it feels like work the City of Toronto and more specifically the community members and leaders that we're working with can be really proud of. Because it is a reflection of them and their living experience in the city. And we know that this work will be able to impact future generations as well, which feels critically important to the story. So I'll end there. Thank you for, I think, Anta, the couple of extra minutes. And I did see some questions in the chat, and I've tried to put some responses for folks in there as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Imara. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thanks so much, Lauren. All of you have been very much amazing, sharing very candidly what your municipalities have been doing so far, and especially so well when it comes to collaborating for climate adaptation. I guess we'll just have time for just a very short Q&A, but to be able to share some at least more answers. So I guess one question would be for Lauren, where we had a question in the chat with one of our attendees who would really like to know, how did you incorporate equity and inclusion within the regional adaptation plan. So maybe if you could share just a very quick highlight over.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of the actions within the plan were focused on equity. So things like making sure that support for vulnerable populations was there during extreme weather and flooding events. So things like creating warming or cooling centers or other ways to support those populations. Also making sure that the limited public transit that we do have is continued to be accessible during those weather events for people to be able to get around. And also making sure their vulnerable populations have access to internet access as well. So those are some of the kind of equity inclusion actions that were put into some of the plans.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Lauren, again for sharing. I guess we are just going to try to squeeze one very short question. So I guess that will go to our lovely folks from Toronto. And if one of you could please, just in a very few seconds, summarize how did the city went on to identify potential partners to collaborate with them, and that have been effective, and how has it really influenced the community climate resilience, especially when it came to collaborating with vulnerable groups?
Yeah, great question. So I think Toronto has a long-standing partnership with United Way Greater Toronto. So that has certainly helped guide some of our partnership work. But because we're community development folks, our work has always been rooted and grounded in relationships. So we've been able to really utilize those relationships and have different discussions that maybe folks in the environment and climate, forestry, or emergency management departments might not have because they're just not necessarily community development folks. So that's been then I guess the asset that we bring is we are well connected to nonprofit organizations. And not just through a funding relationship, but in terms of coordinating and collaborating for their service delivery and the folks that they serve. And then with our connections through the Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy, which is really focused on place-based community leaders, we have deep relationships and connections there as well. So I suppose if you have departments like ours in your municipality, or there are small or large nonprofit organizations who do this kind of community development work, they would be fantastic partners to connect with. And of course, educational institutions are always helpful to us in bringing their group of students to help us brainstorm and design solutions to some of the challenging problems that we face in terms of reaching the folks that we need to reach.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It was very much helpful, and the answer was I hope, a lot of food for thoughts for all of us today. So in an interest of time, we unfortunately have to move on, but if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll be very happy to reach out to you personally and share the answer once our panelists have shared their thoughts. So we hope that this session has been informative and that the Q&A has resolved certain questions. So would really like to extend our gratitude to our panelists and really get to know more about your thoughts. If you could please, share your feedback throughout the poll that has been answered, that have been on your screen so far, and just share your thoughts on today's webinar. It really takes less than a minute, and it really helps us plan future sessions to make them as relevant and interesting for you as possible. So we'll just give people just a quick minute. So they can answer the question. So I can see questions are coming in. Okay, perfect. Maybe one more, just to allow the last person. Okay. Fabulous. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you sharing your feedback. Like I said, it really helps us. and really allow us to service your needs better. So we'll now just share just a few things that we would like you to be aware of. So if you're interested in more peer learning opportunities, we invite you to join our communities of practice to deepen your knowledge on climate-ready plans and processes, and any matter related to adaptation and action. So for more information, please visit our website using the QR code on screen, and more information about each of these two community of practice will also be available. We also have another peer learning opportunity that's offered through our NZAP team to become a pilot community program to kind of collaborate better. So please feel free to scan the QR code on screen as well to be able to access this opportunity and learn more about it. Last but not least, we would love to stay connected with you. So please take a few ways that this could be done. Subscribe to our FCM Connect that you can access using the QR code. Visit the LLCA's website. Contact our outreach team by email or telephone, and they'll be very happy to share any information or provide you any guidance if you are interested by any of our funding offers. So it is on top of the hour. We really thank everybody for staying with us today, for listening to our amazing panelists, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye for now.